I'm saying hi. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Have a great summer sing, everybody, or a September sing.
I know.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Great
you,
to see
Stephen.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Stephen. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye, Stephen.
And for the technically aware, we are now streaming on YouTube. So we'll be joined by other people who are not necessarily members. They could be any place in the world that has a connection to the internet. So Portland Symphonic Choir is now live on YouTube.
And so we don't need to do anything to be a part of the September Sing?
I think Wendy will cover
No.
some of the details. You want to
Well,
do it now, Wendy?
Yeah, and no, you don't need to do anything to transition into the next part
I
of
am
our
so
gathering.
relieved. Thank you. Thank you.
You are
I
welcome.
toast you all. I
So-
toast you. Yes, yes.
It's 7 o'clock.
We have a special guest, second step. Go ahead.
Oh, no. We're going to start our September Sings portion of this evening. And just wanted to welcome so many guests that I see here on Zoom. Also wanted to give a welcome to our friends joining us on YouTube. We are so glad you could join us tonight for our first ever virtual September Sings. So, and before we get started, I wanted to thank the members of the Portland Symphonic Choir who participated in our Lift Every Voice project. We have gotten an amazing response to our video with comments about the quality, the content, and the cause. We are continuing to raise funds, so if you're planning to contribute to this project, it's not too late. And if you've not seen the video, check it out. I think Jade's going to post it in the chat. I just wanted to say that I'm so proud to be part of an organization and lead a choir that would take on this project. So well done, everyone. Thank you so much. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Sharon Paul. Sharon is currently interim department head of the music department, head of choral studies at the University of Oregon, where she conducts the internationally award-winning chamber choir. And you should check out their videos on YouTube. They're excellent, they're fantastic. Sharon appears frequently as an adjudicator, clinician, teacher, honor choir director throughout the United States and abroad. And in March of 2020, Oxford University Press published Dr. Paul's book. It's called The Art and Science in the Choral Rehearsal, which features many of the creative evidence-based teaching strategies she has cultivated over her career. Sharon is also the conductor of the Eugene Symphony Chorus. And just on a personal note, I will let you know that I'm second flutist in the Eugene Symphony. So for the past 18 years, I have gotten to hear Sharon's choirs sing, I think, just about every major choral work. And the choir is always so well prepared, flexible, attentive. And Sharon has had to deal with a myriad of conductors, always super professionally. It's always fun to watch those interactions. But I'm so pleased that Sharon is here with us tonight to lead us through some of the choruses of, I've heard, one of the symphonic choir's most favorite pieces, the Mozart Requiem. So now I get to turn it over to Sharon, and she's going to explain a bit how the evening will proceed.
Good evening to everybody. So I understand that this is the very first of these sing-alongs. So we are all guinea pigs this evening. I'll tell you how I'm going to hopefully do things. We're going to do just a couple of really quick warm-ups. Then I'm going to talk a little about the Mozart Requiem. And I'll highlight a little bit about a movement after I talk generally about it, talk a little about a movement, and then we will sing the movement, or if you want to listen, you can listen to the movement and enjoy. If questions come up or comments, they could go in the chat, and somebody will be monitoring the chat and on YouTube and on Zoom. So we're going to start by, I'm going to do a really quick warm-up just for your brain, and I hope you'll indulge and do this with me. It takes just a little bit of physicality, but not very much. So as you're seated there, and maybe you've done this before, in one hand, you're going to hold the first letter of the alphabet and the corresponding number in the other hand. So it looks like this. I'm just going to start, but then we'll start over and just demonstrate. A, 1, B, 2, C. So I'll start again so we can all start together. You can drink wine in between or do whatever you need to. Good luck. And here we go together. And A, 1, B,
2, C, 3.
G. And since you're on mute, I assume you all did that perfectly, and that went extremely well. It's funny how difficult it is to remember the order of the alphabet and even what number you're on in that exercise. It's great fun to do with a big group of people. A little strange to do on mute, but here we are. We're going to do just a little bit of humming to get the vocal cords warm. We're going to start just middle range, hum and chew a little bit for me. It's kind of middle. Now you're going to go down, do some low, easy. And we're going to end up high as if Mickey Mouse was really, really mad. And a little bit of all of those. Great. And last thing, I'm going to have you sing a little bit. Now I'm hoping that I can share my screen, and I'm going to share a little solfege exercise, which probably a lot of you have done. So let me put this on my screen and then share. And if life is good, you will see this exercise. All right. Are you seeing an exercise? Excellent. All right. So one of the great advantages of being on Zoom is that we don't need to all do the exercise in the same key, right? We don't need to try to stay together. So you can pick whatever your favorite key is and you can sing it. This is the exercise that I'm sure a lot of you have done. That's do, re, mi, re, do. And we'll just sing it through I'm going to do a count, then I'm going to actually mute myself so that we can all sing in our own keys. So just take a look at that. You can see the whole thing, I hope. And here we go. Are you ready? And 1, 2, 3, go. I see a few faces that are still going. That's fine. So if I were doing this in real life with a group that we could hear each other, we could then sing it in a round, which I won't do this evening. And you can also, to do Solfege 2.0, you can have people snap. So for instance, we would sing through, but on fa, you can only snap. There has to be silence on fa. So it's fun to do it in a round with snapping on fa or snapping on t, which is actually quite difficult. So I hope you have your voices warm just a little bit now. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the piece in general before we get to actually singing along. So there's a tremendous amount of drama and mythology surrounding the creation of Mozart's Requiem. Lots of conspiracy theories around this work. So I'm going to do a quick review of what we think really happened. So in the summer of 1791, Count Franz Walsegg von Stubach wanted to commission from Mozart a requiem in honor of his wife, his late wife, who had passed away in February. And he sent a messenger to request this commission. And there was some subterfuge because this count was an amateur musician and he had a habit of commissioning better musicians to compose music, and then he would recopy it in his hand and pass it off as his music. So we believe this is what he was actually going to do. So of course, Mozart was very often not in good financial straits, and so he accepted the commission, but he also had some other pieces he needed to finish first. So he had to finish the Magic Flute, another work from 1791, and La Clemenza di Tito, another opera from that year. So he finished those in the summer, and then in the fall, he returned to working on the Requiem. He had done some sketches, but finally got to working on in the fall. But unfortunately, he was in very ill health by the fall. And so he died before he could finish the Requiem. And his wife, who was actually a very astute business person, she wanted to get the commission fee, or the second half of the commission fee. So she asked the students of Mozart to finish the Requiem, which some of them found quite hard to do, but Franz Süssmayr was successful at completing the Requiem. So the question is, how much of this is actually Mozart? And so we know that Mozart composed the vocal parts and figured bass for the introit, the Kyrie, the sequence up through the 8th bar of the Lacrimosa, and then the offertory, so the two movements, the Domine Jesu Christe and the Hostias. But he only did the orchestration for the introit. So that beautiful opening is actually Mozart's orchestration. So it's so, so lovely the way he chose the colors for that opening. So Süssmayr probably worked from some unfinished sketches, and he also likely had conversations with Mozart, because he had been traveling with Mozart to Prague before this. So probably they had some conversations about how he thought it ought to go. But most of the Sanctus, the Benedictus, and the Agnus Dei, we believe is largely Süssmayr. So I've had the pleasure of preparing this piece for, 6 or 7 different conductors. And each of them interprets it a little bit differently. Some of them bring out kind of the romanticized side of this very dramatic work, sort of as a harbinger of the 19th century. And then I prepared it recently for a British conductor, Jane Glover, who had somebody write in the score all the fancy Latin names for the 18th century rhetoric. You know, all these little devices have very lovely, sweet, fancy names that I don't ever remember. And so she really looked at it in terms of the 18th century side of the piece. Tonight, we're going to sing along or listen to the John Eliot Gardner recording, which is one of my favorite recordings of the Mozart Requiem. And the reason I like it so much is I think it brings the best of both worlds. He brings out the drama of the piece, but he also follows the 18th century rhetoric and keeps the drama within kind of an 18th century framework. So I think it's a beautiful performance. This recording actually dates from 1990, so it's 30 years old. But John Eliot Gardner was really ahead of his time in terms of performance practice. He, in 1962, I think it was, or 64, at King's College when he was a student, he did the Monteverdi Vespers, which was just a piece that wasn't so often performed back then. So he really is very much ahead of his time. So I'm going to tell you just one other thing before we dive in, and that is the most unusual Mozart Requiem I've ever done. That was for a Belgian conductor, Peter van Hagen, who came to the University of Oregon and wanted to recreate a 19th century performance practice where the choir was actually in front of the orchestra. So all of you as symphonic singers know that when the choir is behind the orchestra, there's so often balance problems. And probably an orchestra's least favorite thing in the world is when the conductor gives the hand and says, please, play a little quieter, we can't hear the choir. And conductors don't like doing that either. So there was a performance practice where the choir was in front of the orchestra. So we recreated this at the U of O. So I had 31 singers in 2 rows. The first row sat while they were singing. The second row stood when they were singing, but sat when they weren't singing. And they were on the apron of Bell Hall, for those of you that have been to the U of O campus. So they sat, and then behind them was the orchestra on a platform. And it takes 2 conductors to make this work. So Peter, the Belgian conductor, was conducting the orchestra, and the orchestra again is behind the singers. So they have to use their ears quite a bit, which was lovely. And then in front of the singers was another conductor, Mark van Skewick, who also happens to be Belgian, who is on our faculty. And there were almost no balance problems whatsoever. It was really a very, very beautiful way to do the piece. Occasionally there were precision issues, keeping tempi together because you're dealing with two different conductors coordinating with each other. But it was actually really lovely. So I think I'm becoming a believer. So let's see. Let's dive in. I'm going to highlight just a few things for each movement. And then we'll play, we're going to start with the introit and Kyrie, which we'll play together. And if you have questions or comments, there are people monitoring those, as I said. The music is going to scroll on your screen, so I'm not planning on conducting because I think the music will take up most of the real estate of the screen. If anyone hates that and really wants me to wave my arms, I'm happy to, but I think really you're going to be very occupied looking at that music and looking at someone in a box. Conducting may not be so easy, so I thought that might be a little bit better. So the Requiem is scored for 2 basset horns. I'll explain about that in a moment. 2 bassoons, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, which is alto, tenor, bass, 2 timpani, strings, continuo, so organ with bass instruments, SATB chorus, and soloists. So the basset horn is in the clarinet family, and it looks as if you put a bass clarinet in the washing machine on hot water and it shrank. And so it looks kind of like a mini bass clarinet. It was created around 1770, and Mozart was actually very fond of the instrument. So he used it in the Requiem, he used it in both of the late operas I mentioned, The Magic Flute and La Clemenza di Tito. He tends to use it in its higher range, which is kind of mellow. It's a little mellower than a clarinet. It's quite a lovely sound. It has its own distinct color. Mendelssohn used it also, and Richard Strauss used it, but it died out, or it was out of favor when orchestras got really big. So the opening of the Requiem starts with really such incredible starkness. So you have just a few chords and then a lone bassoon sighing. It has always felt to me like a kind of a terrifying, very vulnerable opening. And after just a few sparse chords, there's another basset horn and then another bassoon. So it feels, to me at least, very uncertain. Then the choir comes in, and we're always, as singers, we're always very occupied with here's our entrance and here we're starting the Requiem. But in this recording, if you get a moment, listen to what the strings are doing underneath right when the singers come in, because they have this very beautiful sighing motive that's offbeat, and it's really quite lovely. So I wanted to make sure and call that to your attention. It starts in a very dark D minor, with this plea to grant them eternal rest, and then turns to an F major chord and then an F7 chord when we're talking about this beautiful transformation to perpetual light. Et lux perpetua luceat eis, right? And may perpetual light shine upon them. And this will lead us eventually into the Kyrie Fugue, which is just a very powerful fugue that harkens back to Bach and the tradition of that beautiful fugue writing. If you like this fugue in the Kyrie, good news, you're going to sing it again at the end of the piece, pretty much note for note, but on other text. Let's see. So with that, I think we're ready to go ahead and sing along or enjoy listening to the Mozart Requiem's Introit and Kyrie. Great. Any questions that we need to, yeah, more wine? Do you need more wine? Great. Any questions that need to be curated at this point? Are we doing okay and I should go on, or?
The chat room is empty.
Okay. Great. I will continue. Okay, so we move on to the Dies Irae, which is appropriately full of fire for our day of wrath. The world is going to be dissolved into glowing ashes. I'm actually going to share my screen again, if life is good, and show you something that I think is quite remarkable about this movement. And here we go. Let's see. All right, and you're singing, are you seeing the Dies Irae on your screen? Fantastic, yes, okay. I love technology when it works. It is a great thing. So you're probably familiar with this beautiful opening of the Dies Irae, which is so wonderfully fiery. But I want you to remember, can you see my pointer also? Fantastic. I want you to remember, because we're going to see it later in the Sanctus, this descending fourth motive, followed by a descending fifth, which we see again here, and then this third right here. So we're going to see that again. It shows up again in the Sanctus, but in slow motion. So I just wanted to point that out. There's this quite striking motivic unity there, which is probably Süssmayr pulling in Mozart. There's also beautiful word painting throughout the entire piece. I'm just going to show you one place. I hope nobody gets motion sick. I'm going to do this kind of slowly because I don't want to scroll so fast that it bothers anybody that has motion sickness. But there's this great moment that the basses get where they're trembling in fear, and they're trembling so much that they can't stay on the right note. So here we are, basses. We have this trembling and this beautiful word painting where you tremble. So much that you go down a half step, and it even happens twice. I think that's such a beautiful example of some of Mozart's word painting. All right, so this is a very short movement, and here we go. Whoops, screen sharing has stopped. Great, thank you. That has to be one of the most fun Dies Iraes to sing ever, right? Maybe rivaling the Verdi. I think the Verdi has a great Dies Irae as well, but I think this is just a fantastic Dies Irae. Okay, we move on to the Rex Tremende, and here we have a very regal, kind of king-like rhythm, right? So we sing the word Rex 3 times, the word king 3 times before the sentence continues. And there's probably some symbolism there of singing it 3 times. And then the other thing that's so very regal about this majestic movement are these dotted rhythms that we have. And of course, the big debate always when doing this is how much to double dot and how much to just use the dots. I will leave that to you to debate, but we're going to listen to the Rex Tremende. Oh, one other thing about it, when they ask to be saved later in the movement, listen to the very vulnerable, exposed singing. And so he contrasts so beautifully these very majestic large chords with these much more tender requests to be saved.
It's saying someone else is sharing at the moment, not allowing me to share.
Oh, I hope it's not me. It's not me.
Jade, any suggestions?
Keep trying. I'm not sure why you're not able to share.
It says one participant can share at a time. So
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
You might need to do the
You
Allow
should-
everyone to share.
You should be able to now, Wendy.
Okay, yep, now I can.
Great. Did I see in the chat a little question about or talking about the German Latin, Kvi? I thought I caught a little bit of that. So that is also always the debate. Here, Helmut Rilling always did the German Latin, as did a lot of conductors that have prepared it here at the Bach Festival. John Elliott Gardner uses Italian, sort of English Italian Latin. So yeah, I'm quite used to the German Latin as well.
We do have a comment from Kathy Gansky saying that she's been well trained to make sure the inner K sound in Kunta comes out. So way to go, Ms. Gansky.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't. I thought it said KV, like Kvi, which is the German Latin. Sorry. Oh, Kunkta, yes. Well done then. Yeah.
And there have been lots of other comments while I'm commenting on the chat about
Yeah.
animals either leaving the room or coming in to respond to Rex Tremende.
Oh. Great. Regarding the German Latin, I've known people from Germany who don't agree with each other about how German Latin should go. And so sort of like when I've done pieces in French and I had twin young women who were twins, who were French, and they didn't agree on where the liaison should go in French. So languages, diction, it'll drive us crazy. So we're going to move ahead to the Confutates, but I do just want to say that I think the Recordare is one of the most beautiful movements in the piece. And given the world and so much tension and stress and pandemic and fires, find a room and listen to the Recordare, close your eyes. It's just absolutely beautiful writing. But we won't be listening to it tonight. I'm sorry. We're going to move on to the Confutates, which is not a relaxing piece. This has this very fiery, agitated accompaniment as people are damned and consigned to the flames of hell. It has this very pummeling ostinato, that da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which is so fantastic. And for those of you that saw the movie Amadeus, you probably have always married this music to that scene, you know, where Mozart's on his deathbed and he's dictating this movement, and you see other things happening in the movie. It's such an extraordinary scene. As an aside, I saw the stage play of Amadeus on Broadway in 1982. I happened to be in New York and went. And the stage play was fantastic. It was a couple of years before the movie came out. And they had one piece of stagecraft during the stage play that, I mean, I remember it almost 40 years later because I still have not figured out how they did it. But near the opening of the play, they have Salieri on stage kind of narrating and talking about what's happening. And he's an elderly man. He's old, he's wearing a black cape, he's stooped over, and he's talking about Mozart and his jealousy of Mozart's writing. And then as he's speaking, he did a sort of a 360 turn. He turned around completely. And when he turned back, and he talked the entire time, he kept talking. And then when he turned back to the audience, he was a young man. I mean, I have no idea how they did it because it looked like the makeup was different. Everything about it was so incredibly magical. So, and it obviously made an impression since I remember it all these years later. So the Confutates has these extraordinary contrasts of this kind of pummeling dramatic ostinato, but then these treble voices who sing this very simple, pure toned pleading to be saved. So it's quite an extraordinary contrast in the Confutates. And then we think it's over when we get to that point, but then there's this very simple connection to the Lacrimosa. We're going to listen to the Confutates and the Lacrimosa back to back. I don't know if anyone out there has ever performed, I've heard of choirs doing this, where they sing the Mozart Requiem, but only the parts that they know he wrote. So after 8 bars of the Lacrimosa, they stop. Has anyone ever done that? And I guess they must go on then to the next part that he actually wrote, which would be the offertory. I think that would be kind of amazing and charming. So in the Lacrimosa, it begins with just violins and viola, and listen for that absolutely heartbreaking depiction of weeping. It's so beautiful the way he starts that piece. And then you have the singers come in with these lovely plaintive lines. It's quite something. But again, pay attention if you can to the strings underneath who have this sighing motive, which is also quite beautiful. We're always trying to have enough air to get through these incredibly long lines in this piece, so we don't tend to be thinking about what the orchestra is doing right there, but it's such a beautiful moment in the orchestra as well. And this piece builds to the phrase, the guilty person shall rise from the ashes to be judged. Of course, this piece is done, I think, in churches as an isolated piece fairly frequently. I was curious to listen to different recordings and see if anyone takes it super slow or super fast. John Eliot Gardiner tends to be not on the slow side. I listened to von Karajan recording of the Mozart Requiem because he does tend to be on the slow side in his tempi. And the Lacrimosa was not that different, but the opening introit was the introit and Kyrie, I guess it was together, was a full minute slower than John Eliot Gardiner's. So that's quite a big difference in singing time. So it was the tradition at the end of the big sections of the Mass to write a fugue, but here at the Lacrimosa, which is the end of the sequence, we find just a very, very simple Amen that Süssmayr put in. In the 1960s, scholars believe they found a fragment of an Amen that was intended to be, that was by Mozart that was intended to be plugged in here. And I know that the Portland Symphonic Choir has sung the Levin completion of the Mozart. And he does take that fragment and he composes a whole amen, which is shocking to audiences if they're used to the Süssmayr and you're used to this very simple amen, and all of a sudden you get a fugue. I mean, he wrote this very complicated fugue on the amen. This was a commission from Helmut Rilling, actually, for the 200th anniversary of the death of Mozart in 1991, this new edition. And so he had him do a completion, which I find this amen. So some of you have sung this. I assume I saw one hand go. I don't see everybody, but I saw a hand go up. So I found when I've prepared the Levin that singers either love this amen at the end of the Lacrimosa, or they hate the amen at the end of the Lacrimosa. We won't do a vote here, but perhaps you have strong feelings as well about this particular piece. So let's see, I think that's all I was going to say about it. So now we're going to listen to the Confutates. I'll go right into the Lacrimosa. Beautiful. Let's see. We move on now to the Domine Jesu Christe. And this movement is characterized by contrasts and sudden outbursts. It has some of the most angular and jagged lines of anything in the Mozart Requiem. And it has my favorite moment of word painting. So I have to share it with you because it's my favorite. And so I'm going to, hopefully, if life is good, I'm going to share my screen with you and show you. This is the place where the tenors, whoops, hang on. I always forget to press the share button. Okay, you're seeing the Domine Jesu Christe, I think. Yes, great. Okay, so this is the place where the tenors are being drawn down into the pit of hell and they're trying to stay out. Yes, right? It's such a cool moment. So here it is, tenors. They get this motive first, where they're literally going to be swallowed into hell. And so you have these fantastic leaps up and down. It's such a fantastic moment of word painting. And then the altos save them, of course. And this continues on till everybody, poor sopranos, start very high before they descend into the pits of hell. So it's just an absolutely great, great moment of word painting. After this, there is a kind of a calm for a moment quartet before we get to the closing fugue of this movement. And this is the fugue that depicts God's promise to Abraham. And anytime you want to depict generation to generation to generation, a fugue is absolutely the best symbolism. So we have this beautiful fugue, Quam Olim Abrahe. So we're talking about spreading the seed of Abraham from generation to generation to generation. So you have fugal entrance after fugal entrance after fugal entrance. So it works so beautifully. And it's just a very lovely fugue at the end. So now we're going to listen to the Domine Jesu Christe and enjoy that tenor moment.
Wendy, before you click on that, there are a couple of noteworthy comments in the chat session.
Yeah.
First of all, Brian Haskins wants to thank Dr. Paul as he sang a memorable performance of the Mahler Symphony No. 2 at U of O with Helmut Rillig in 1997. Way to go, Mr. Haskins.
Oh, wow. That, I have to say that wasn't me, but I will accept that on behalf of the University of Oregon. I wasn't hired till 2000.
And there seems to be a little bit of an online poll going that it would be a bad thing, as in a crime, to cut the Lacrimosa after just 8 bars. We need to sing it on. And people want to know if everyone is listening to Carlos Kalmar whispering previous directions in your ear, and how about count singing to make sure subdividing is correct. So think about that. I'll mute myself.
That's great. Now we move on. We're going to move ahead to the Sanctus, and I'm going to share my screen, I hope, so that I can show you the magic of motivic unity. All right. And you're seeing the Sanctus, I'm assuming. Great. So remember in the Dies Irae, I mentioned those opening intervals. So here we have this beautiful Adagio Sanctus, and here we have from the Dies Irae, this is probably Süssmayr that did this, although perhaps it was on the advice of Mozart. We have our descending fourth that we saw in the opening of the Dies Irae. We have our descending fifth that we saw in the opening of the Dies Irae. And we have that third, it was an F natural going to D, now we're in major, so we have F sharp going to D. So there's this rather beautiful motivic unity here between the Sanctus, which is so beautifully majestic and appropriately in D major, but it harkens back a little bit to that day of wrath. And then I'll show you just the very optimistic, cheerful, and under some conductors way too fast Hosanna fugue. I don't know if you've ever done it with someone that really goes fast, but it's great fun and very hard to get all the notes in there. So let's see, I think that's all I'm going to say about the Sanctus. I'm going to stop sharing so I don't cause trouble, and we'll listen to the Sanctus. Great. And good. And then we are now at the Agnus Dei. We'll end up listening to the Agnus Dei to the end. I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me to do this, and just say that it's been a pleasure to have some faces to look at as I'm doing this. And I have to say, Dale has the greatest reactions. It's fantastic, which helps because any of you that have taught over Zoom know it's so challenging because you're not sure how it's going. You know, when you teach in a real room, you pace your, you can pace because you can look at people and see. I did, a couple weeks ago, I did a presentation for a conference in Brazil, and it was on StreamYard. And when you're on StreamYard and you share your screen, which I shared slides, you don't see any faces. So you just are doing your thing. And in that particular instance, I was speaking and then I'd say 3 sentences and then they'd have to translate it into Portuguese. And it was also in the morning Brazil time, which meant it was 4:15 a.m. our time. And so I just felt like I was it was the middle of the night and me and my computer talking without seeing any faces. So I really appreciate, I've seen delightful faces, and thank you, Dale, especially. We've never met, but I look forward to meeting you someday and thanking you for helping. So now we're at the Agnus Dei and we've returned to a dark mood here. We're back to D minor. We close with the same fugue that we opened with. Instead of the Kyrie, now we've come full circle, cum sanctis tuis in aeternam, with thy saints forever. So it's such a beautiful ending. The very last chord has no third in it. And I have thought a long time about this last chord, because I think you can see it two ways. You could see it as being kind of ancient and grounded, or you could see it as being unresolved. It doesn't have that feeling of resolution at the end. So I don't know where you land in that debate, but I'm not sure, for all the times I've done this, I'm not sure I have an answer yet to how I feel about that final chord that doesn't have a third. Something feels a little unfinished there. I do want to say before we sing it that Constanza was smart and arranged a performance of the Süssmayr completion before Count Walsek could. So she did it in January of 1793. She made sure there was a performance that obviously had Mozart's name on it. The Count didn't get around to doing it until December of 1793. And by then he really had to admit that it was Mozart's work because it had already been performed under Mozart's name. So I hope you enjoy then the ending, the Agnus Dei, which will go right into the Lux Aeterna and take us to the end of the Requiem.
Oh
I know you all sounded great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really good. It provided some additional insight for many of us that have done it a number of times. It's always good to hear an additional interpretation of it. I'm sure everyone would join me in showing your hands in a virtual applause for Sharon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fairly terrifying, so thank you. I'm glad.
It never sounded better, and I never had to remind myself to turn the page early. It was just always there.
There you go.
Yeah, Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much for leading us tonight. It was good to see everyone. Glad everyone's staying safe. And remember, next week, we are doing Carmina with Imre Paulo. So come back 7 o'clock next Thursday. Any other final questions for Sharon before we sign off?
Like digital goosebumps. That's nice.
There's some great comments. Take a look at the chat. And as a follow-up reminder, everyone, Janice, you're turning your screen. The parking approvals in the back of the hall, be sure to have your parking pass validated. Thank you all.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions, just lots of thanks to you, Sharon. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, see everybody next week.